The first light of dawn slipped over the valley like a whisper, touching the ridges of the cottonwoods with gold. The land was silent but for the rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the river below. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney set against the slope, marking the Kane homestead, a modest cabin built from pine and sweat, the kind of place a man built when he wanted to be forgotten by the world. The air carried the scent of sap and cedar, of horses and wet earth. Somewhere in that stillness, the world seemed at peace, the kind of fragile peace that only came after years of thunder and blood. Elias Kane stepped out onto his porch with a steaming mug in his hand, his frame broad but worn. The scar along his jaw caught the sunrise as he squinted eastward, scanning the tree line the way old scouts do without thinking. He'd spent too many years in the saddle, too many nights crouched by dying campfires, to ever stop watching the horizon. But here, out here, the wars were supposed to be over. The Union's blue, the rebels' gray. It had all bled into the same brown dust years ago. He took a slow sip, feeling the warmth in his chest. Behind him, the sound of iron struck softly. Clara was already awake, stoking the stove for breakfast. She moved quietly, with the sure grace of someone who had learned to survive by doing, not waiting. Her hair was pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, and her hands were rough from work, but when she turned, her eyes carried the kind of calm that steadied a man's soul. "Coffee's gone cold if you stand out there too long," she said, voice smooth as the morning wind. "Just checking the weather," Elias replied, though his gaze lingered on the distant ridge beyond the cottonwoods. "Looks clear. Always does before the storm," she said with a faint smile, sliding a plate of biscuits onto the table. He chuckled softly, but her words struck deeper than either of them admitted. It wasn't the weather he watched for anymore. It was something else. The way the crows had grown louder near the creek. The tracks he'd found 2 mornings ago that didn't belong to deer or elk. Horses, at least 5 of them, shod but ragged, crossing his land from the south. Elias had brushed them over with his boot, not wanting Clara to see. She had enough to carry, without another reason to worry. But the valley held its breath differently these days. Even the wind seemed to whisper through the pines, like it was warning them. They ate breakfast in quiet routine, the clatter of forks the only sound inside the cabin. Clara poured more coffee, then reached for a sewing basket. Elias watched her a moment, the sunlight catching her profile, strong, gentle, unwavering. She wasn't like most frontier wives. When sickness took half the settlers through the winter of '78, she rode 30 miles through snow to fetch medicine. When a wolf pack tore through the henhouse, she had dropped one with a single shot from her husband's rifle. If peace had a guardian, it was her. After breakfast, Elias saddled up his bay mare, Sable, and rode toward the far pasture. The land opened wide, rolling into ambergrass and dry sagebrush, the kind of country where a man could see forever and yet feel utterly alone. He checked the fence lines, hammered in a few nails where the wire sagged. Every few minutes he stopped and listened. The silence out here was too deep, too perfect, as if nature itself was waiting. At the creek, he knelt beside the cold water, refilling his canteen. That's when he saw them again, hoof prints, fresher this time. The edges still dark and wet in the mud. The horses had passed at dawn, maybe less. He followed them a short distance up the bank, heart tightening as they veered toward his homestead. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing. A blue jay shrieked in the woods, startled by something unseen. Elias's hand brushed the worn handle of his Colt. "Not today," he muttered under his breath. When he returned home, Clara was tending to the wash outside, the wind lifting her skirt around her boots. He didn't mention the tracks. He only said, "We'll move the cattle closer to the barn for a few days." Her eyes met his, calm but knowing. "You found more, didn't you?" Elias hesitated, then nodded once. "Might just be drifters, but if it ain't, we'll be ready." That night, as the sun bled behind the ridges, the valley turned to fire-colored dusk. The shadows of the pines stretched long over the land. From their porch, Elias and Clara could see the distant town of Merrow Creek, its faint lights flickering against the horizon. They'd been there only a handful of times since settling. Folks were kind enough, but talk ran faster than the wind out here. And lately, that talk had turned dark. Rumors said the Harlan gang was back across the territories. Men who had once fought for the South and refused to accept the war was over. They'd been soldiers once, but now they were thieves, raiders, killers. They drifted from county to county, burning what they couldn't steal and burying what they couldn't use. And the worst of them, Jed Harlan himself, was said to hold a grudge against Elias Kane. Elias didn't know how much of it was true, but he'd seen enough hate in men's eyes to know that old wars never really died. They just changed uniforms. Clara came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "It's them, isn't it?" He didn't answer. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke that didn't come from their chimney. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a campfire burned. Clara didn't flinch. "Then let them come," she said softly. "We've faced worse." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had followed him through droughts and winters, who'd buried their first child in the red clay of the valley and never once broken. "You're stronger than any man I ever rode with," he said quietly. She gave a faint smile. "You taught me." They stood there in the fading light, two souls bound by years of silence and struggle, listening to the world go still around them. As night fell, Elias moved through the cabin, checking the shutters, oiling his rifle, and lighting only a single lantern near the window. Clara gathered what food she could into a small sack, jerky, biscuits, a flask of whiskey, and laid it near the hearth. Neither spoke much. The language between them was older than words, the tightening of a jaw, the nod of understanding, the brief touch before separation. When the moon rose, it hung like a pale coin over the valley. The sound of crickets faded. Then came the first echo, hoofbeats, far away but steady. Elias moved to the window, rifle in hand. Down by the lower ridge, faint lights danced, torches. At least half a dozen, moving in a slow, deliberate line. Clara joined him, her face calm, eyes hard. "So it begins." Elias nodded, his expression like stone. "You take the Winchester. If I tell you to run, you head for the river bend. Follow the ravine until you hit the pines." "I won't leave you," she said. "Clara, I won't," she repeated, her voice low but iron. "This is our home." The wind outside grew restless, carrying the smell of smoke once again. The horses in the corral shifted nervously, snorting and stamping at the dirt. The torches below flickered brighter, their glow crawling up the hillsides like the slow spread of hellfire. The night cracked open with the sound of horses. At first, it was only a distant rhythm against the hills, like thunder rolling slow across the earth. Then the echoes sharpened, hooves striking hard soil, bridles clinking, men's voices rough with drink and hate. Elias Kane stepped out from the barn with his lantern raised, its glow trembling against the wind. The horses in the corral whinnied, stamping as though they too could smell the coming violence. He caught sight of them at the ridge, torches in a crooked line, their flames waving like the tongues of demons. There were at least 8 riders, maybe more, moving fast down the slope toward the cabin. Elias's hand tightened on the rifle, his chest filled with the old weight, the calm before battle, the familiar cold that always came when death was near. "Clara," he called, his voice cutting through the night. She appeared in the doorway, the glow from the hearth behind her painting her in gold. She already had the Winchester in her hands. One look at his face, and she knew. "Inside," he said. "Now." But she didn't move. She cocked the rifle instead, the metallic click ringing out across the yard. "They'll torch the barn first," she said. "That's where you'll be." Elias wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The first bullet whined past his head, shattering the lantern. Darkness swallowed the yard, and the torchlight from the ridge became the only glow, hell descending. He ducked behind the corral fence, firing twice into the night. A scream followed, high and sharp, and a rider tumbled from his saddle. The rest roared like wolves. Clara moved to the window, steady and deliberate, loading as fast as she fired. Each shot was measured clean. One outlaw pitched forward over his horse's neck, another spun backward, his torch tumbling into the dry grass. For a moment, the light turned wild and chaotic, shadows dancing across the land. Then they came closer. A shotgun blast tore through the barn door, splintering wood inches from Elias's face. He rolled aside, pain burning through his shoulder as a bullet grazed him. He pressed his hand to the wound. Hot blood, shallow but cruel. He crawled along the dirt, finding cover behind the old wagon. The outlaws fanned out, yelling orders, their boots crunching across the yard. "Burn it down," a voice bellowed. "Burn it all." Flames took to the barn's side where the torches hit. The dry pine caught fast, a wave of orange and black roaring upward. The horses screamed in terror, kicking at the stalls. Elias forced himself up, staggering to free them, but another shot caught him in the side. He fell hard, breath torn from his chest. The world blurred. Through the smoke, Clara's voice rose, fierce, defiant. "Come closer, you bastards," she shouted, and another gunshot cracked. The sound carried rage and grief, and something holy. The men hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. Then they swarmed the porch, kicking in the door. Gunfire lit the cabin from within, flashes of yellow cutting through the windows. Elias dragged himself toward the sound, every breath agony. He could hear them shouting, laughing, breaking things, the familiar joy of cruel men. When he reached the porch, he saw two bodies down in the dirt, outlaws. Clara had made them pay, but there were more inside. He pulled himself up the steps, gripping the revolver at his hip. The door flew open before he could reach it, and a man stepped out, broad, scarred, his beard streaked with gray. He grinned down at Elias with recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, "if it ain't the Shadow Scout himself." Elias's blood ran cold. It had been years since anyone called him that. Years since the war. "Didn't think I'd find you playing farmer, Kane," Jed Harlan said. "After all the men you put in the ground, this is what you turned into. A rancher with a wife and chickens." Elias tried to lift the gun, but pain stole his strength. Harlan kicked it away. "Don't bother. You're half dead already." He nodded toward the cabin. "She's coming with us. The rest, burn it." "Don't," Elias rasped, reaching weakly. "Jed, she's got nothing to do with this." Harlan crouched, his eyes hard with old hate. "You took everything from me in Missouri. My land, my brothers, my pride. You should have died with the rest of your kind. But now I get to take what's yours. Balance." He stood and motioned to his men. "Hang her at dawn. Let every settler see what happens when they build on Harlan soil." Elias lunged, but the butt of a rifle met his face. The world went white, then black. When he woke, smoke filled the air. The cabin was ablaze, flames licking the roof, glass shattering as heat devoured everything he'd built. Through the haze, he saw them riding away, Clara among them, her hands bound, her face lit by the fire's glow. She didn't cry out. She just looked back once, her eyes meeting his through the smoke. Then she was gone. Elias tried to stand. His body refused. He crawled instead, dragging himself across the dirt toward what remained of his life. The fire's heat burned his skin, but he kept moving, inch by inch, until he reached the porch. He reached out for the doorway, but the roof collapsed with a thunderous crack, sending sparks and embers skyward. The blast of heat knocked him back, the world spinning. He lay there, chest heaving, staring into the inferno. Every nail, every board, every memory consumed. The shadows of his life twisted and fell into ash. And in that glow, the past returned. He saw himself younger, riding under a blood-red sky, a Union rifle on his back and a bounty on his head. They had called him the Shadow Scout, for how he moved unseen through enemy lines, how his bullets found men before they even drew. He'd hunted guerrillas across the plains, fought under no flag, answered to no general. He had been a ghost made of dust and vengeance. Until Clara found him. He could still remember that night, her small lantern on the trail, her voice trembling as she said, "You don't have to keep killing." And for the first time, he believed her. Now her voice was gone, stolen by men who knew only hate. Elias rolled onto his back, stars spinning overhead. His wound throbbed with each heartbeat, but the pain only sharpened his focus. He pushed himself up with a groan, staggering toward the tree-line. The revolver still hung at his side, heavy but loaded. He took it, checked the cylinder, 5 bullets left. Enough. The forest swallowed him. Branches scraped his shoulders as he stumbled deeper, The fires glowed, dying behind him. He reached the creek and fell to his knees, plunging his bleeding hand into the water. The cold shocked him awake. He tore a strip from his shirt, wrapped the wound tight, and drank until he could breathe again. Then he listened. Far off, he could hear the faint laughter of riders echoing across the hills. They thought he was dead. They thought the war was over. He leaned against a tree, the revolver across his lap, and watched as his cabin burned through the gaps in the pines. The flames stretched high into the sky, painting the clouds red like spilled blood. Smoke drifted over the valley, dark and heavy. For a long time, he said nothing. His breath came slow, steady. The fire crackled like distant gunfire, whispering through the wind. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, calm, the same tone he used the night before a battle. "By sundown," he said, the words tasting like iron, "every one of you will pay." The first light of dawn crept over the ashes of the Kane ranch. Smoke still curled upward from the ruins, drifting into the quiet blue of the morning sky. The valley was silent except for the faint crackle of dying embers and the slow, steady breathing of a woman tied to a post near the fence line. Clara Kane stirred, her face streaked with soot, wrists raw from the rope that bound them. The outlaws had left her there for the coyotes, assuming the fire and the night had finished what their guns had started. But the dawn found her alive. Her eyes fluttered open. The air was thick with the stench of charred wood and horse sweat. Every part of her ached, but pain meant life, and life meant she could still fight. She twisted her wrists against the rope until it tore at her skin. The fibers burned, but she didn't stop. A gust of wind brought a drift of ash that stung her eyes and coated her hair in gray. Then the rope gave way. She fell forward into the dirt, coughing, gasping for breath. For a moment, she just lay there, staring at what was left of her world. The cabin had collapsed into itself, a skeleton of beams and blackened stone. The corral was empty, the barn a heap of twisted metal. The valley that once sang with life now looked like a grave. Somewhere out in the hills, a raven called, its cry thin and lonely. Clara's mind snapped back to Elias. They'd left him bleeding near the barn. She'd seen them strike him down, but as she scanned the scorched yard, she found no body, only a dark trail of blood leading toward the trees. Her heart clenched. "You stubborn fool," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're still out there." She rose to her feet, legs trembling, and stumbled toward the barn's remains. The ground was still warm beneath her boots. She found Elias's rifle, half buried in ash, the barrel scorched but intact. She ran her thumb along the stock, feeling its familiar grooves. Then she picked it up, checked the chamber, one bullet left. Not enough for what she intended. She searched the ashes until she found a small tin box, their keepsake chest. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were Elias's spare cartridges. She loaded the rifle and slung it over her shoulder. The air was colder now, the sun climbing higher. Somewhere out there, the Harlan gang was celebrating. And if Elias lived, he'd be hunting. In the shadows of the pines, Elias Kane moved like a ghost. The night had left him half dead, but anger was a cruel medicine. It kept him on his feet. He'd bound his wounds with strips of cloth torn from his shirt, cleaned them with creek water, and kept walking. His revolver hung heavy at his side, 5 bullets gleaming in the dawn light. He knew these canyons better than any man alive. He'd ridden them as a scout, mapped them for the army, bled in them during the war. Every ridge and hollow, every dry creek bed. He could see them in his mind as clear as a map. The Harlan gang had ridden south toward Red Bluff, an abandoned mining stretch cut with gullies and choke points. It was where men vanished if they weren't careful. Elias smiled grimly. He would make it their grave. He followed their tracks through the dust. 8 horses, 1 rider lighter than before. Clara's scream still echoed in his head, but rage turned it into focus. By midday, he reached the mouth of the canyon. A broken wagon lay near the ridge, half sunk in sand. He crouched low, scanning the horizon. Then he saw them, 3 men, resting their horses near the creek. They were laughing, tossing coins, rifles propped against the rocks. Elias steadied his breath. He raised the revolver, sighted the nearest man through the gap in the wagon. The first shot rang out sharp and clean. The outlaw jerked backward, dropping into the dust. The other two spun around, yelling, scrambling for their guns. Elias was already gone, moving through the brush like wind. A second shot echoed, then silence. When the third man fired wildly into the trees, the bullet hit nothing but air. When the smoke cleared, Elias stepped out, bloodied, calm, revolver still warm. He knelt by the last man, who clutched his stomach, gasping. "Who leads you?" Elias asked quietly. The outlaw coughed, eyes wide. "Harlan, he's heading to the mine, the Red Bluff, with the woman." Elias's jaw tightened. "Then you die knowing you rode for the wrong man." He left the body where it fell and disappeared into the canyon. That evening, the Harlan camp sprawled beneath the cliffs, horses tied, a fire burning low. The men talked in uneasy voices, glancing at the dark ridges above them. Word had spread fast. Someone was picking them off, silent, precise, invisible. They spoke his name in whispers now. "The Shadow Scout," one muttered. "Thought he was dead." "Dead men don't shoot this clean," another said, staring at the fire. "He's coming for us. I can feel it." Jed Harlan laughed, though his eyes were sharp. "Let him come. The valley's ours now. He'll find nothing but his own grave." He threw another log into the flames, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that the night itself was watching. Miles away, Clara moved through the foothills, following the tracks of their horses. She'd armed herself with what she could salvage, Elias's rifle, a hunting knife, and a small pouch of bullets she'd found near the creek. Her body ached, but her heart burned with purpose. Each step she took was a prayer and a promise. By midnight, she saw their firelight flickering in the distance. She crouched behind a boulder, clutching the rifle. There were too many for her alone. But if Elias lived, he was near. She felt it, the same way she once felt his approach before he even entered a room. That old connection, born of countless nights surviving side by side, now hummed through her like a pulse. She whispered into the wind, "Find me, Eli." The wind answered with gunfire. A shot cracked through the canyon, then another. The outlaws scrambled, shouting, diving for cover. Bullets ricocheted off stone, scattering sparks. One man fell screaming into the fire, clutching his chest. Panic rippled through the camp. "He's here!" someone yelled. Elias moved through the rocks like smoke, unseen but deadly. He fired once, twice, each shot deliberate, each finding its mark. He was no longer a farmer. The soldier in him had risen from the grave. His breathing was steady, his aim perfect, his mind clear as glass. As chaos tore through the gang, Clara seized her moment. She slipped closer, crawling through brush until she reached the edge of the camp. A fallen outlaw lay nearby, his revolver half buried in dust. She took it, her hand shaking but sure. Two men tried to mount their horses. Clara stood, sighted, and fired. One fell instantly, the other turned in shock, eyes widening as he saw who shot him. The look of disbelief on his face lasted only a heartbeat before Elias's bullet dropped him where he stood. Smoke and dust filled the air. When the last echoes faded, silence fell heavy. The campfire hissed, blood darkened the sand, and the wind sighed through the rocks. Clara stepped into the open, the rifle still raised. Elias emerged from the shadows opposite her, limping, his face streaked with dirt and blood. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, two ghosts drawn back from the edge. Then Clara ran to him, and he caught her, pulling her into his arms. She trembled against him. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I was, until they took you." The sun bled low over the Red Bluff canyons, spilling its dying light across the broken ridges, like a wound that would never close. The air was heavy with dust and memory, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Down in the valley, the abandoned mine lay still, a skeleton of rusted rails and splintered timbers, its tunnels swallowed by darkness. The wind hissed through the shafts like a whisper from the dead. Elias Kane stood at the ridge's edge, his silhouette carved in red firelight. His face was streaked with dust, his coat torn, his left arm bound tight against his ribs. But his eyes, they burned steady, cold, and certain. In his hand rested the Colt, polished dull with use, its metal glinting faintly in the last light of day. He watched the mine below, every sense alive. He could see movement, men waiting, rifles gleaming faintly in the shadows. And near the entrance, tied to a post, was Clara. She sat upright, hands bound, her face turned toward the setting sun. Even from this distance, Elias could see she wasn't afraid. Her back was straight, her jaw set, with the quiet defiance that had carried her through everything. The sight tore at him, rage and love bound in the same breath. Down below, Jed Harlan leaned against a boulder, his hat tipped low, a cigar glowing between his teeth. The last of his gang, 4 men, stood watch near the mine's entrance, eyes darting across the rocks. "He's coming," one muttered. Harlan smiled. "He'll come. The Shadow Scout always comes. But this time, he dies where no one will find the bones." He tossed the cigar to the dirt and crushed it under his boot, the smoke curling up like the soul of the day itself. From the cliffs above, Elias moved. He descended slow, deliberate, silent as the desert night. The crunch of gravel beneath his boots blended with the wind. The world around him had narrowed to sound and instinct. The click of a rifle being loaded somewhere to the left, the shuffle of a boot heel near the mine cart, the low hum of Harlan's voice drifting through the dusk. He slipped into the shadows between boulders, crouching low. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of gun oil and sweat. He took his knife from his belt, the blade dark against the fading light, and waited. A century passed within arm's reach. Elias rose behind him like a ghost, a hand over the man's mouth, the knife flashing once. The body dropped soundlessly. Another turned at the faint rustle, but by then Elias had already drawn and fired. The shot cracked like thunder. The canyon answered with echoes, and chaos erupted. "Up there!" someone shouted. Bullets sparked against rock as the gang scrambled for cover. Elias ducked behind a boulder, reloading quick. He fired again, the muzzle flash lighting his face for a heartbeat. A second man fell near the mine cart, his rifle clattering across the stones. The others cursed, firing wildly into the cliffs. Harlan shouted over the din, his voice deep and commanding. "Spread out. Don't let him circle." But Elias was already moving, cutting low through the brush, flanking them. He knew these rocks like the back of his scarred hands, the gullies, the ridges, the blind spots where a man could vanish between breaths. Another outlaw spotted him too late. The shot took him square in the chest, spinning him backward into the dirt. Only 2 remained. Down by the post, Clara twisted against her ropes. The chaos had loosened one knot. She pulled hard, skin tearing, breath sharp. The rope gave just enough for her to slip one hand free. She worked the other, every second stretching into forever. Harlan saw her and shouted, "Don't even think about it, girl." He yanked his revolver free and fired a shot into the dirt near her feet. Dust jumped. "He ain't savon you this time. You'll die same as him." But Clara didn't stop. She tore her wrist loose, blood streaking her hand, and grabbed the fallen outlaw's revolver lying in the dirt nearby. The steel was still warm. Elias appeared from the shadows behind Harlan's men, gun raised. The shot that followed cracked through the dusk, and the last of the outlaws fell. Now only 2 men stood, the hunter and the hunted. Harlan turned slowly, face hardening. The setting sun painted his features in copper light. "You should have stayed dead, Kane." Elias stepped closer, revolver steady. "You burned my home. You took my wife. You made me remember who I was." Harlan's mouth twisted into a grin. "Then let's finish what the war couldn't." The 2 men stood 10 paces apart, the wind swirling dust between them. The air hummed with tension. Elias's hand hovered near his belt, his fingers curling slightly. The world seemed to still, the wind, the birds, even the sun itself holding its breath. Then Harlan drew. The guns fired almost in unison. Elias's shot caught Harlan's shoulder, spinning him back, but Harlan's bullet grazed Elias's side. The pain flared bright and quick, but Elias didn't fall. He advanced, firing again. Harlan ducked behind a rock, reloading fast. Clara moved from her post, keeping low, heart pounding. She saw Harlan raise his pistol, aiming for Elias's back. Without thinking, she lifted the revolver and fired. The shot struck Harlan's gun hand, shattering it. He screamed, dropping the weapon. Clara stepped forward, breath shaking, smoke curling from the barrel. Elias froze, eyes wide, watching her emerge from the haze like a vision born of fire and defiance. Harlan clutched his bleeding hand, laughing through the pain. So that's how it is, the rancher's wife kills me herself. He spat blood, glaring up at her. Go on then. Finish it. You think it'll bring your peace. Clara's hands trembled, the revolver heavy in them. For a moment, the world was quiet again. The sun dipped lower, turning the canyon gold and red. She looked at Elias, at the man she'd built a life with, who'd crawled from the ashes to stand again. Her voice was low, steady. Peace died when you came to our valley. She fired once. The sound rolled through the canyon like a storm. Jed Harlan fell backward, eyes wide, the dust rising around him as the last light of day faded from his face. Silence followed, deep and sacred, the kind of silence that settles only after the earth has been paid its due. Clara stood still, the revolver slipping from her fingers. Elias reached her, catching her before her knees gave way. He held her close, her face pressed against his chest, the scent of smoke and gunpowder thick between them. It's over, he whispered. She shook her head slowly. No, it's done. There's a difference. They stood there until the wind rose again, sweeping through the canyon, carrying away the smoke. The bodies of the dead lay scattered like broken shadows, their torches dying one by one. By the time night fell, only the stars bore witness. Days later, when riders from Merrow Creek found the mine, they spoke in hushed tones of what they saw. The tracks of 2 horses leaving the canyon side by side, the prints deep and deliberate. They found the bodies of the Harlan gang where they'd fallen, and a single cross planted in the red earth. Word spread fast. Folks said the Shadow Scout had returned for one final reckoning. They said his wife had stood beside him when hell itself came calling. The story grew in the telling. Some claimed the valley still glowed red at sunset, as if the earth remembered the blood spilled there.